something's begun to smell. I'm not sure what. It could be me. That'd be weird if though. I take the time to shower every day. It calms me, helps me relax. It's frankly the only place that I feel comfortable in. I don't want to go outside. I got work soon. Might just try extending leave. I feel like my time's running out anyway. I just got off the phone with my doctor. He said that there's nothing wrong with me. Physically, at least. You're fine, he'd said. He sounded cheerful too. Well, I really can't disagree anymore. Does a man that turned his whole apartment upside down without even knowing for sure what he's looking for sound fine? Does a man whose neighbors and friends had begun to spread rumors about him sound like he's doing fine? Does a man who would have been overjoyed to have heard he had a tumor on the side of his brain sound fine? And don't bring up psychiatrists. I've had one since I was 16. Anger management. She doesn't help. Really, if you ask me. The worries that woman has are starting to show. On some days, I'm not really even sure if she's listening to a word I've said. But I digress. The point is, I've run into a dead end. I have no means to explain what had happened. And at this point, I'm not sure if I want to know. Frankly, I want nothing more but to turn back time and return to my old usual routine. Waking up in the morning and going to work, coming home. Falling asleep while watching the TV. But there's no real way to ignore this. If not my conscience, something else would eventually force me back into it. I'm sure of it. It started 2 weeks ago. The first part of the routine worked well enough. I got up and I went to work. I went off home. At least that was the plan. As I was walking down the hall to my apartment, I happened to bump into Karen. She's a neighbor, right next to me. We sometimes happen to bump into each other since she's a nurse and often has to work night shift. Middle-aged, but her wit's still razor sharp. At least that's what I believed. That's exactly why this exchange was so bizarre. The conversation started out well enough. I talked about work. She talked about her day. She's raising a kid all on her own. Can't stop talking about him. And that's okay, you get used to it. Just your average, everyday existence. All of a sudden though, she asked me something weird. How's your wife? A few days ago, she said that she and I would get coffee together. I've been trying to get in touch with her, but she's not picking up her phone. Is she okay? I thought she was joking at first. But jokes are meant to be funny, right? A single mother wouldn't exactly be poking fun at a young bachelor. No. She clearly picked up on my confusion, but didn't push it any further. Not because she didn't want to. She was as nosy as they came, but she had to run to her shift. We bid each other goodbye and I slid my way into my apartment, the conversation still lingering. I stood at the doorway for a few moments, trying to figure it out, and eventually, I just shrugged it off. But when something's wrong, you just don't get to look away from it. 15 minutes later while I was showering, I had a horrifying realization. I had a wedding ring on my left hand. To describe the emotion it gave me would be nigh impossible. How would you have felt? You probably would have chalked it up to a prank, right? Started replaying things in your head. Trying to maybe pinpoint when someone could have slipped on your finger without you noticing. But you quickly have no choice but to dismiss it. As a prank, it's bad. As an explanation, it's even worse. And then your mind would have probably gone to the other extreme. And you would have thought of yourself as crazy. The latter's a lot harder to shake off. I stumbled out of the shower and I looked at myself in the mirror. I was obviously still me. Tired, more than usual. My eyes were weary. I hadn't shaved in a few days, and over the years my skin had left its mark on me. Wrinkles. It's usually not that bad, but the dim bathroom probably made my reflection more depressing than it actually was. I stood like that, observing, calculating. I was leaning against the sink. It took me a minute to realize that my arms were trembling. I suddenly felt weak. A fever? Unlikely. It felt like something was crawling in my thighs. The more I became aware of it, the further across my body it spread. The only thing giving company to my unsteady breathing was the water still dripping from the shower head. It felt like a trance. At some point, I must have flat out stopped thinking and I just stared. Have I somehow forgotten that I'm married? It's ridiculous, it's insane. My shaking would not stop. Unable to find an explanation for the ring, I decided to look around my place. If I was married, then there should have been obvious signs that a woman was living there. Something, anything. But the place looked like it always had. No makeup, no female clothes, no photos. Nothing. For a brief moment, I felt somewhat relieved. But it wasn't enough. I had to be certain. I have no social media, so my only bet of gaining information was trying to talk to my friends and family. I couldn't just flat out ask them, "Hey, do you know if I'm married?" Instead, I decided to send out a few text messages, start a casual conversation, and then casually drop a mention of my wife, and see how they would react. The response was devastating. People either ignored it or, much more often and much more horrifically, they replied with, "Oh yeah, how's Nancy doing?" Who the fuck is Nancy? I remember blurting out at some point. I mean, obviously that was the name of my wife. In fact, examining the wedding ring revealed an inscription that read, "From Nancy to Jay, and may we always be together." Even though it was impossible, even though I had absolutely no memory of it, the truth was undeniable. I was married, and I had somehow completely forgotten about it. I tried to think back to the last few days. The goal was to see if I had any major holes in my memory. If I had forgotten the person I was supposedly living with, then there must have been something glaring. But everything lined up. Every part of my memory fit quite neatly. Of course, I realized that. If I had been married for a while, whatever the issue was would have damaged my memory in a far more substantial and long-term way. And that trying to retrace my footsteps was not a trustworthy method to begin with. I flipped through my contacts, and sure enough, there was a single Nancy. I tried calling, only the dial tone though. I had no photos on my phone. I was never one to keep any. The same for the computer. I was completely baffled. The next day I paid Karen a visit, remembering it was her day off. Since I had no other way of gaining information indirectly, I mean I probably did, but I was just too impatient. I just flat out told her what my issue was. She was a nurse, so I figured that she would understand. The first thing she told me was that I should contact a doctor immediately. The second thing was that if Nancy was really nowhere to be found, and I couldn't get in touch with her, and I had no memory of where she might be, it'd be worthwhile to call the police. The police? What would they do? What would I even tell them? If Nancy actually existed, and I was her husband, and I walked up with this bizarre story of not remembering her, they sure as shit wouldn't accept it with open arms. But still, I kept that to myself and I nodded along. My real objective was to learn more about my wife. Karen explained that Nancy wasn't very talkative and kept to herself. She didn't have a job, something which, as far as Karen was able to tell me, I didn't mind. When I tried pressing for details, the answers were so vague. I couldn't piece together the image of this mysterious woman. It already started to feel like I was getting nowhere. It was only when I had asked when she'd moved in that two things became even more troubling. Oh, 2 years or so, I think. Karen had told me. And according to her, our wedding was as recent as last March. The revelations just kept piling on. Jesus, am I missing 2 years of my life? That thought alone was enough to get me into a doctor's office that very same day. They agreed to do some tests. On my way back home, I bought a carbon monoxide detector. I've read somewhere memory loss was a common symptom of the gas. Even though I knew it probably couldn't be on the scale I was experiencing, I had to be sure. My place turned out to have no carbon monoxide. I think I can safely rule out poisoning in general at this point, since the doctors would have caught something on the blood test, right? At the time though, I was still unsure, so I began rummaging through my apartment yet again, trying to find some sort of clue, some sort of evidence that she was there. Nancy. What kind of person is she? How had we met? What was the sound of her voice? How did she smell? What color were her eyes? What kind of hair did she have? Was she tall? Short? Had she been the first to say, "I love you"? What had our plans for the future been? Living together for 2 years. You can't tell me it's just all gone. My earlier search must have not been as thorough as I figured. At the time, I probably should have realized the fundamental problem in my reasoning. Even if I had missed something, it didn't change the fact that my apartment had been arranged in such a way that it looked like she was never even there, by someone. Thinking about it now, maybe I had realized it. Maybe I was just looking for something they'd overlooked. Either way, as I told you earlier, I turned the place upside down. As the night drew on, I grew more frustrated. The furniture that I hadn't just shoved over, I threw across the room. I don't think the neighbors got a wink of sleep that night. I know I didn't. By 4 a.m., I was just about ready to scream in agony. Had I really gone mad? Was my perception of what was real and what wasn't completely wrong? That apartment I was standing in, was it even mine? Was I who I claimed I was? Was any of it real? What if it was just a nightmare? It didn't make any sense. I dropped to the floor. It had only been a few days, yet my body felt like it was withered. A mere shell of its former self. Something had been slowly sucking the life out of me. The seemingly undeniable confirmation of Nancy's very existence felt like a parasite slowly leeching on me. My throat felt dry. I want to crawl up and just try and hope that by the time sunlight peaked, I'd be freed. That some magical explanation would come through, then I could just go on with my life. Actually, maybe I wanted even less. Maybe I just wanted someone to confirm my version of reality. Just one person, even if they were wrong. Even if they'd misunderstood the situation. Even if I had to go and make them believe Nancy never really existed. Just one person. That would have been enough for me. But above all, I think I just wanted to cry. But that's when I noticed that one of my floorboards was loose. In my desperation, I pried it open to reveal a sealed plastic bag. Inside of it was a knife, its blade covered in blood, dried. Judging by the dust, I'd say it had been there for a few days. I'd already given up asking what it was doing there. Maybe because a part of me suspected the answer. Because the knife itself looked familiar, as it should have. It was part of my kitchen set. Karen stopped by the next day, asked me about the noise. I dodged the question at first. I was fairly certain that she was going to call the police. I finally blurted out that Nancy and I had gotten into an argument, and that she'd gone out to stay with her parents. My display from that day earlier was just having a mental break of some kind. I don't know if she was satisfied with that alone, but the cops still haven't knocked on my door, so I'm inclined to believe that she was. Either way, I haven't spoken to her since. I called my mom, and this time flat out asked her about Nancy and everything that had happened to me over the past few days. I begged, I hoped that the joke would end there. Or that maybe my earlier test with dropping my wife in the text messages was a big misunderstanding, and that I was still sane, and still a bachelor. My mom said nothing at first, and then, Good God, and you don't know where she is now? It's no joke. This is my reality. I'm married and my wife is missing, and I have a bloody knife in my apartment. If my memory can't be trusted, could I have done something terrible and just not be aware of it? Every time I hear sirens in the distance, I shiver a bit. Every moment it feels like somebody's coming for me. And I'm holed up in a room with someone I trust the least right now. Myself. There were quite a few times while writing this when I wanted to run outside and get somebody to just watch me. And each time, that desire was snuffed out by the voice in the back of my head, convincing me that I am still sound of mind, and that something else is going on here. A faint hope that it's the world that's turned against me, and it's tricking me in hopes of driving me mad. As stupid as the thought is, it's oddly comforting. It's better than giving into the feeling that you've been put into the passenger seat of your own car. The driver? It's your own shadow. Someone you feel like you've never met before, but is undoubtedly there. It's better than the nightmares of waking up in my apartment in complete darkness, stumbling about, slowly being choked by something. Really, at this point, I'm not even sure if those are dreams. Maybe whoever, whatever, has decided to do this is right here with me, cackling at how miserable I must look. Nancy. On some nights I want to tell myself that she was a ghost, that I could hear a woman whisper my name, that she's kind, that she loves me, and that if I just reach out, she would grab my hand and hold it until my heartbeat steadied. That this woman, this mysterious woman who I had supposedly loved for 2 years, would give her husband comfort in a time like this. That she would understand, that she would try to tell me that whatever happened, it wasn't really my fault. But who would believe that? Who would believe this story? Would the police? Would a lawyer? Would a judge? Would a court-appointed psychologist? Maybe I'm just asking too much. How about I just start with you? You're clever, right? Do you believe me? No, actually, let me rephrase that. Do you believe that I believe this?